There's lots of options no matter how you want your birth to be. You feel like you're educated, you consent to it, you know the pros and cons, you choose it, and then you go down that journey of having the birth that you really want to have.
We want to empower you to make fully informed choices about your pregnancy and parenting options. Let's talk about what's next now that pregnancy has entered the chat. Welcome back to the Pregnancy Has Entered the Chat podcast. We are so excited to have Grace Johnson on the podcast today. Grace is a doula and lactation consultant, and I am so pumped to learn from her expertise today. Grace, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
Awesome. So today we're talking about all things labor and delivery, breastfeeding, and more. So I'm so thankful that our listeners get to learn from you. And do you want to share a little bit about your background and how you got to where you are today?
Yeah. So like you said, I'm Grace, and I am married to my husband, Royce, live here in Greensboro, born and raised here. Had my first daughter. She's 5. And after her birth, I became super passionate about birth. Like, I wanted to scream from the rooftops. This was amazing. I had like such a high after my birth. It was not traumatic at all. And I was really lucky in that regards, because a lot of women have a really hard first labor. So yeah, I had her, and I really felt like, wow, God had designed my body to grow this baby, but also to birth this baby. And it's something where women have these instincts in them. And it's something where women can be empowered to really listen to their instincts and have the birth that they want, and not have their birth happen to them, rather like be a part of their birth, be really educated through it. And so I wanted to help women with that. So that's when I started to do my training and become a doula. And then I've had 2 other kids. I have a 3-year-old as well, and a 15-month as well. And then I'm actually pregnant with my 4th.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Due in February. So they keep me busy. But between that, I love serving women as a doula.
Awesome. Yeah, that is so great to hear. And I just love that. I feel like the best passions that we have come from like our personal experiences and stories. And then it turns into something that we just want to like see other women or see other people empowered through.
And that was the same with lactation. Is I had a really opposite of a birth where my birth was great. My breastfeeding journey with my first was really, really difficult. I felt like I had every single obstacle put in front of me, and I wouldn't have been able to get through it without free services and free help from people. So I received like a lot of lactation support, and I was like, okay, I want to give back and do the same thing for other women. So that's when I studied to be a lactation educator.
That is awesome. Man, yeah, it can go both ways, right? You can have an awesome experience and then want to do something with it.
All unpredictable.
Yes. Yeah. So I'm super excited to hear. It's like a gift to us and to our listeners to get to hear what you've learned and all the experiences that you've had investing into women in that way. So jumping right in to the first question, this is something I think a lot of women are curious about, like, what are the stages of labor? How does the labor process work? And if you could just speak to that a little bit.
Yeah, so labor is really unique, and it can take a lot of twists and turns and feel like daunting going into it, especially when it's your first time. You don't really know what to expect. And so that's when you start to feel kind of out of control and nervous. And the more fear you have going into labor, really the harder it is to relax and be at peace through it. So knowing kind of what to expect, what comes next really helps. So there's 3 stages to labor. The first stage has early labor, active labor, and transition. So early labor is really that beginning period, 0 to 4-ish, 6-ish centimeters. And this part of labor is the most unpredictable. So this part can last couple hours or literally days. Especially for first-time moms, it's the longest part. Luckily, it's the easiest part. Usually things aren't quite as intense. Most of it can happen at home if you're comfortable. You start to feel those contractions, but they're less predictable. They're less, coming on a regular basis. But you know that it's real labor because they are starting to progress in intensity, and they are starting to get closer together and more in a rhythm. During this time, it's really good to walk, do curb walking, where you like one foot on the curb, one foot on the road, like walk and walk up and down stairs. That can really engage baby. It's great to try to rest if you can, because birth is a marathon and you've got a whole lot to go. Eating, staying hydrated, taking a shower, those types of things are really good. Getting on the bouncing ball and moving around are really good during that first early bit. And of course, staying in contact with your OB or midwife during this time, so you know like when to head to the hospital or the birthing center. And then you go into active labor. So this is when things are really going to intensify more. It's usually about 6 to 10 centimeters here, like 5, 6, all the way to 10. You'll start feeling more pressure in the back, more leg cramps. The contractions themselves are more intense. This is usually where it's time to head to the hospital. Usually your water will break sometime within there, but it can break at the beginning, and your baby can actually be born in the water. So it doesn't necessarily, but typically that's when it would break. During this time is like, if you're going to get an epidural, this would be the time that you get it. If not, this is a really good time to move positions, try different positions, try different massages, counter pressure on your back, lots of different things you can do to relieve the pain. Hydrotherapy, like getting in the shower. Usually women start to feel more nauseous during this time. Those are things to expect. And active labor usually takes like 4 to 8 hours, depending. Usually first-time moms closer to that 8-hour mark, and then subsequent pregnancies go a little faster. So typically this is like where you really start getting intense, and like the 5-1-1 rule, which is where contractions are happening for a whole hour. So that's the one, lasting for 1 minute every 5 minutes apart.
Okay.
So every 5 minutes apart, the contraction lasts 1 minute. That happens for an hour. You know, like you're really engaged in active labor. Time to be at wherever you need to be.
Okay.
Yeah. And then you get to transition. Transition is the worst part, the hardest part, the most intense part, but it's the shortest. So praise God for that. Yeah. This is when contractions start coming much closer together. So instead of getting like a minute break, you start only getting 20 seconds, 30-second breaks. The contractions typically would go like up, down, but sometimes during transition, they go like doop, 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 and then back down. So they get much more intense, much closer together, last longer, but transition, like I said, can be from 15 minutes to an hour.
Okay.
So much shorter. And you know that like you're in the home stretch.
Yeah.
So this is the final part right before you're about to push. Baby's really, really getting engaged. So if you haven't had an epidural during this time, this is usually when women start saying, I need the epidural. But you're so close. It's right at the end. You've pretty much done all the work, and this part is about to pass and it's about to be time to push. So it really is the final stretch. Good things to do here is like pray and meditate and come into yourself, close your eyes, really focus, because you're at the end there.
Yeah.
So then you go, so that was all stage 1. Stage 2 now is the actual birth of your baby. Yay, time to push. So this is where if you have an epidural, your nurses will be like watching the monitor, and they can tell when your contractions are peaking, and will be telling you and helping guide you. Like, okay, push and counting. If you haven't had an epidural, you'll feel the natural urge to push. You won't need to be told. You'll naturally feel that deep, deep pressure, and you'll push. And this part can take usually like an hour on average for first moms. It can take a couple of minutes, 1 to 2 pushes, or it can take like 2 hours, but usually somewhere closer to like 45 minutes to an hour. And you just keep pushing. You can push in a lot of different positions. Traditionally, like on your back with your legs up is what you're going to do if you've had an epidural. If you haven't had an epidural, even at a hospital, they have a squatting bar. You can do it squatting, hands and knees, standing up, leaning on a partner. So many different options. It's really great to just explore what feels better for you with gravity and all of that, what feels like open and comfortable, and explore that. So after you've pushed, The baby will be delivered. If everything is good with the baby and healthy, they'll immediately put it to the mom's chest, skin to skin. The cord will still be attached, and they usually leave the cord attached for a little while to make sure baby gets as much blood as they can, which helps with their iron. They clamp it. Whoever wants to cut the cord can. You can actually cut your own baby's cord. I know like in the movies, it's always like a partner or something, but you can actually cut your own. I cut my third kid's cord. Yeah.
That's awesome.
It's kind of,
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah, my husband said, I've had enough cutting the cord, your turn. But yeah, so you can, I didn't realize that like the mom, you've done all that work. You can cut the cord if you want to. So yeah, after like a few minutes and the baby gets all the blood through and it stops pulsating, you cut the cord, you have baby. And then the last stage of birth is your placenta. People forget about then you have to deliver the placenta. It's really not hard at this point because you've already pushed the baby out. You're in like a baby dreamland high. You're feeling great. But it is a couple of more smaller contractions. They'll ask you to gently push. Then the placenta will come out usually within like an hour max, usually closer to 15-30 minutes is when the placenta will be delivered. They'll check to make sure the placenta is all intact. If you want to take your placenta home, you would just need to tell them. If you're good to go, then they take care of it from there. And then, those are the 3 stages. You've done the marathon at that point.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Man, yeah, that is so cool to like just have it laid out and have the information of like, okay, this is kind of a outline of what this process is going to look like for me. We talk about a lot with our clients, like having all the information because knowledge is power.
Right.
And so I think that is so helpful, even thinking of like women's stories where maybe they're at that point of transition and they're like, man, I just can't do this anymore. Like knowing that is like the most intense part and that the end is in sight and that baby's coming, like that can just be so comforting, I'm sure, to have that information. So I love that. Thanks for sharing. And so along with that, if a woman wants to create a birth plan of things that she wants and doesn't want during her labor, what is kind of the best way to do that? What are the things that you need to include in that birth plan? Yeah. So I would say it's great to go in having a birth plan and knowing what you want out of your birth. One of the best parts about creating a birth plan is it helps you learn all the different options and things. Like as you go to create it, you can go on Google and there's tons of free templates you can use. The Pregnancy Network has a template that they give if you go to the classes. But as you go through and see, these are all the pain options, you can say, what's that? And you read on and figure out what everything is, all the different positions you could want. That's when you'll learn them. So it's a really good tool just for your own self to learn all the different options. I would say keep it to, 1-ish page because you don't want to hand the nurse like a book to read. And then you're really going to just be putting like what's really important to you. Like, who do you want in the room? What kind of pain management do you want or not want? What kind of vibe do you want? Do you want quiet? Do you want people to try to be quiet? Do you want a lot of music? Do you want lights? You can bring your own Christmas lights to put around or like the fake candles if you want. Like, think about those things. Think about if you want some birth affirmations or the ultrasound pictures or anything in your room. Just like the atmosphere that you want. Yeah. And then you put on there like the things that you want right after birth. Like, I want to make sure baby comes straight to me. I want to delay the cord clamping. I do or don't want the different shots and things that happen right afterwards. Like, go ahead and familiarize yourself with what those are. Because after you give birth, you're like, whoa, you're not like, you're like, okay, you don't know really. You're just... So it's good to go ahead and like familiarize yourself with what's going to happen and all of that and think about what you do and don't want. Yeah. And then if you have any like religious things around the placenta, or I want the first person to speak after my baby's born to be this person and I want it to be a prayer, like those types of things, think through that and include that on your birth plan. That's awesome. I had never even necessarily thought about like the atmosphere or like those little things like what happens after birth, who wants to like, of course, mom usually wants to hold baby first, but like who wants to speak and who, if you want to pray or whatever that looks like. I think that that's a really awesome thing for people to hear, that like that is also in their hands. Like they can, I mean, nothing's guaranteed. Like you said, like every birth looks different, but having that outline, I feel like it is empowering. It makes you feel like
you're in control and it's your birth. And it is.
Yeah.
Of course, everyone there's main goal is a healthy baby and a healthy you. But as long as those things are happening and everybody is healthy, there's no reason why there can't be all these other outside goals and things.
Yeah. That's awesome. So how can a mom advocate for herself during the birth process, whether that's to stay within her birth plan or just kind of communicating her needs to her team, if it's a midwife or an OB? What have you seen work well?
Yeah. So I think the first is confidence in knowing that you are the mom. You have instincts given to you, and to really be ready to speak up for that. Of course, the nurses and the OBs and the midwives and everybody there cares about your baby, but you are the mom and you know what you're feeling and those things, and you can trust your gut. I would say with your birth plan, bring it up to whoever you're meeting beforehand in your prenatals so that you can talk through these things and make sure, is all this okay? For example, somebody says, I don't want an IV. Like, I just don't like IVs. I don't want an IV unless there's something wrong. Can I avoid the IV? Most OBs will say, okay, sure. As long as everything's going fine. You know, normally they would put the IV in and block it just so that if something happens, they'll have it. But a lot of times they'll say, okay, that's fine. But if you never say that, if you never ask, they'll never know that you even want to be considered for something like that. So talking to them prenatally about those things that you're wanting can really help, so that it's not in the moment trying to have a discussion. Same with like, if you're saying, I really want to avoid Pitocin, like I know we're not there yet, but I want to avoid Pitocin, which is a drug to help induce labor. You can go ahead and have that discussion. Well, what are the pros? What are the cons, etc., versus having to do it right in the moment. So anything you can feel like you can talk about beforehand can help, so that you can get on the same page with your team. And then in the moment, it's hard sometimes to not see doctors and nurses as like an authority figure, the ruler, like a police, because they're smarter than me. They are older than me. They know what they're doing. I don't know. But really you end up paying them a lot of money. They're working for you. You're the mom giving birth. It's your baby. So trying to remember that it is okay to say, wait, I have a question. What are you putting in my IV? What is that? Like, wait, why? Why are we doing this? Can it wait an hour or two? Like, what are the cons? What are the pros? What are my other options? Feeling like it is okay. They are used to this and routine and just start doing things. Women who feel like at the end of their labor had a positive experience, it doesn't necessarily mean that it went to their plan. It went exactly how they wanted on their birth plan. It's that they felt in control and that they were educated on the process. They knew what was happening. So rather than just being given something, they were able to pause and say, what is it? What are the pros and cons? And then like from an educated standpoint, say, okay, yes, I consent to that versus it happening to them. So really, you know, getting up your courage enough to pause and ask, or have whoever's with you know that, hey, if things are happening, please stop them and say, most of the time they have 5 minutes to explain something. And if they don't, they'll say, we don't have time. And that's fine. Of course, your baby comes first. But really knowing that you're the one in control here. It's your body and you don't have to consent to anything. They can't tell you that you have to sit down or that you have to do this. Like, you are the one in control. And that's kind of hard to wrap your mind around because they feel like an authority, but yeah, that is so good to hear. I'm sure for women listening who are maybe preparing for labor and just thinking, man, I don't really know what's going to happen. Like, I'm just not sure. Like, maybe they've heard things about Pitocin or heard things about why you need an IV or whatever that looks like. But knowing, okay, I'm the mom. This is my baby. Like,
I'm going to listen to my body. I'm going to do my research. And you talking about doing that research beforehand, I think that's probably super helpful because you mentioned like you usually go to wherever you're going to give birth during active labor. And by then your contractions are like a minute apart. Like you're probably not wanting to have this like
discussion
super extensive discussion. Yeah. So that is awesome to like know that, again, knowledge is power. When you get the information in your hands, like feeling confident in your decisions.
And sharing it with whoever's going to be with you so that they know your birth plan, they know what you want, so they can kind of speak up for you when you're focused on your contractions. They can say, oh, hold on, she wanted this.
Yeah. Having that support person is
really
huge.
Help.
Yeah. That's awesome.
Yeah.
So transitioning a little bit to breastfeeding, I know that there's like a lot of conversation around breastfeeding journeys and all those sorts of things. And I know that it is very hard work. There's those statistics where it says, like breastfeeding is basically a full-time job, so more power to all the women who are choosing to feed their baby in any in any way.
Yes.
But so what do women not know about breastfeeding if women do want to breastfeed that they need to know?
I would say there's a few things. First is breastfeeding is really hard in the beginning and then it levels out. It gets much easier as you get the hang of it and your baby gets the hang of it. So it's like a brand new skill if it's the first time you're doing it for you, but also for the baby.
Yeah.
Like the baby has instincts, but they're still learning. And same with you. You have instincts, but you're still learning. So the first 3 weeks are really the hardest, but then just popping them on the boob is way easier almost than having to wash the bottle and pump and wash the pump parts and all of that and pay for expensive formula. So it does start to get easier, even though it feels really difficult in the very beginning when you're learning. The other thing is there's so much support out there. A lot of people feel really alone in breastfeeding because you're the only one that is doing it and everyone else is asleep and you're up every 2 hours nursing. But there's so many free support groups where moms meet all together and breastfeed together and talk and have community. There's a lot of lactation educators, lactation consultants at the pediatrician, at the hospital after you give birth that are free and included and can help you and really, really make a big difference. The other thing is it shouldn't be painful. With my first, it was extremely painful. And my mom was like, yeah, that's normal. Yeah. It's not normal. It was painful for her and it was painful for my grandma. And a lot of people just suffered through that pain. But if the baby has a good latch, it shouldn't be painful. Maybe slightly uncomfortable at the very, very beginning, but no bleeding, no scabs, no ow, rip the baby off, this hurts. Yeah. Something is wrong. If you're feeling pain, you need to ask for help. You need to speak up. The nurses will send a lactation consultant in, not an additional charge, and they will help you and check what is going on with the latch because it shouldn't be painful. Yeah. The other thing is it's all supply and demand. So as much supply as you want to have enough supply for the baby, it's created by demand. So the more the baby is demanding it, the more the baby is brought to your breast, the more supply you'll create. So those first 24, 48 hours actually creates the milk tissue glands in your breast for the rest of your pregnancy. Wow. So the more you put the baby to the breast during those first 48 hours, the more of those little glands you'll have. So it's really vital in those first 48 hours to just let the baby nurse as much as they want to really bring your supply in. And then after that, you can start stretching to the every 2, every 3 hours thing. But then that little bit to create a really healthy supply, you want to let baby really start demanding it. Yeah. And then not freaking out when your milk doesn't come in right away. It's completely normal and average for it to take actually up to 5 days for your milk to come in, even longer if it's a C-section. So how it works is when the baby travels through the birth canal, it releases hormones to your brain to start the milk production, as well as the baby coming to your breast tells you to start the milk production. So when you have a C-section, you only have baby coming to nurse. You don't have it coming through the birth canal. So you have to really, really work at getting baby to the breast so that you can signal that. But either way, you have those signals, which is really cool how God's just like designed all of this to work. And then the other thing is, while it takes the 5 days for your actual mature milk to come in, during those first bit until it comes in, you have colostrum, which is really great. It's very small in its amount, but it's like a superfood. It's packed full of everything the baby needs. It's plenty. They're getting enough. Their stomachs are like this small at the very beginning, really, really tiny. And then they grow to a marble, and then they grow to like a ping pong ball. So they're really small stomachs. They cannot eat 8 ounces when they're first born. So you really only need half an ounce, things like that at the beginning. And that's why they eat so frequently. They fill their tummies up quickly, and then they're depleted quickly again. So you don't have to panic like, there's not enough milk. It's only half an ounce. It's only this. Like it's designed to be what the baby needs.
Yeah. That is so wonderful. I'm sure that there's so many things that you just said where women are like, okay, it's like so good to know, because even as someone who hasn't been a mom, like you hear those things where like, oh, it's really painful, or like, oh, like you never know if the baby's getting enough, and all these different things that can be, I'm sure, like really stressful and like distressing. So just hearing you say that of like, there are free resources available at the hospital, and like lactation educators, lactation consultants, they can help you, and they want to. And then just, so much of what you just said is so good. And I hope that people can like take that and feel like confident.
You can do it.
Yes.
Yeah, you can do it.
Yeah. That's wonderful.
If that's a goal that you have, like, don't just give up on it. If you want to breastfeed, work through those initial kinks, and then you'll be smooth sailing.
Yeah. That's awesome. And I love like those support groups that you talked about. Is like, just Google a good way to find those, like breastfeeding support groups.
They can, if you give birth at the hospital, they can tell you some, but like Facebook and Google, there's lots of them.
Awesome. Yeah. I'm sure that's good to like have that community and then also have that support all in one. So what would you say to the mom that is having those challenges that we just talked about, maybe at the beginning of their breastfeeding journey?
Yeah, sort of the same things I covered, but just really not feeling alone. Don't feel bogged down and like, oh, I'm not feeding my baby. I'm not good enough. You get into this really negative cycle with that. And sometimes you're embarrassed to ask for help, or you're just like, just forget it. But really feeling like if this is something that you want to do, then go after doing that and reach out for help. Like call your pediatrician and just say, I need the phone number of who it is. Like I need help. And they will be happy to get you into contact, or contacting the hospital. They'll be happy to get you into contact if it's happened after you've already left that you're starting to have problems. And just not feeling like it's too late. There's a lot of hiccups that can happen at the beginning with breastfeeding, but there's a lot of solutions. There's a lot of different things, nipple shields, different positions, et cetera, et cetera. So there's a lot that can be done to fix it that you might you wouldn't be aware of if it's your first time. But those resources are out there that help. And Google like is amazing. There's so much online, so many YouTube videos of women nursing and latching and all that you can watch. Can be helpful.
That's awesome. Yeah, just that encouragement. You can do this, and there are resources to help you. That's wonderful. And so the last question that I like to ask everyone who comes on is just, you covered this a little bit in your background and how you got started, but just if you want to elaborate it on any more, what is your why for serving women in the capacity that you do?
Yeah, so I just feel like, so I've sort of mentioned it, but it can be really daunting to go through this when you haven't done it before. And you see in the movies women like screaming their head off with birth. You hear a lot of negativity around it, that it's going to be terrible or painful. And you end up going into it with a lot of fear. And it doesn't have to be that way. Like women have been giving birth for all of time. Women have been breastfeeding for all of time. you have this in your DNA. God has designed us to be able to do this.
Yeah.
And really helping women see that and grasp that and go into their birth and going into their breastfeeding journey without this fear is really empowering.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't have such a negative view of birth going into it because a lot of the women in my family had good births, easy births, felt like they could do it. So they told me, oh, you'll be a good birther. You'll be a good birther. So I went into it with this mindset that I was going to be able to do it and I wasn't afraid. And I feel like that made it such a positive experience.
Yeah.
So the more women that I can encourage that you can do it, you were made to do this, they can go into it feeling empowered no matter what they want their birth to be, whether they want it in the hospital, at home, whether they want an epidural, nothing, laughing gas, like there's lots of options no matter how you want your birth to be. You feel like you're educated, you consent to it, you know the pros and cons, you choose it, and then you go down that journey of having the birth that you really want to have. So I just love encouraging women that they can do that, and then they can yell from the rooftops after that this was amazing when they have that adrenaline rush after their baby is born.
Yeah. That is so wonderful. And those are such powerful words. Just like, you can do this. When someone calls that out in you, like, you were created to do this, you were designed to do this, you've got this. I think that that's such a beautiful thing that you get to do through your job. And I just love hearing that encouragement. I love that you had that for your first birth experience. And then I love that you turned around and decided to pay that forward. So that's really awesome. And thanks so much for coming on. This was wonderful, and I can't wait for our listeners to get to hear it. So thanks so much, Grace.
Thanks for having me. This was fun. I like talking about birth.
Awesome. Well, thank you.
Thank you.